The river roared like a beast that could not be tamed. Its waters churned, dark and cold, cutting through the forest with an unrelenting fury. Lyria stood on the bank, her cloak whipping in the wind, eyes fixed on a small shape struggling against the current. A pup, fur-matted and drenched, was being dragged toward the jagged rocks below. Without hesitation, Lyria dropped her bag and plunged into the freezing torrent. The water was merciless, pulling at her arms and legs with a strength that made her muscles ache. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she did not hesitate. She reached for the pup, its tiny body trembling and weak, and grasped it tightly. The river seemed to fight her, thrashing and foaming as if it resented her interference. She kicked and pulled inch by inch toward the bank, her lungs burning and her fingers raw from the icy water. Finally, with a last surge of strength, she collapsed onto the muddy shore, the pup trembling against her chest. She held it close, murmuring gentle words to calm it as the forest fell silent for a moment. Only the roar of the river remained, as if the world itself were breathing with her relief. A sudden sound froze her blood. The riverbank trembled under the heavy steps of a figure emerging from the shadows. Lyria looked up to see a man, tall and commanding, with eyes as sharp and dark as the storm clouds above. He moved with an authority that made the air itself seem to bend around him. The pup whimpered and pressed closer to Lyria, sensing the tension. "You have no right to touch what belongs to me," the man said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made Lyria straighten in defiance. "I couldn't let it die," Lyria replied, holding the pup protectively. It was drowning. The man's gaze was like ice, yet there was a flicker of something else, curiosity, maybe admiration. "This pup is mine," he said, stepping closer. "And you are in my lands. You should leave before my patience ends." Lyria did not flinch. She had faced many dangers alone in this forest, but something about this man made her heart race in a way she did not understand. "I saved a life," she said softly. "Is that not worth more than rules and lands?" For a long moment the man said nothing. He studied her as though trying to read her soul. The wind tugged at his dark cloak, and the storm above seemed to mirror the tension between them. Finally he spoke, his voice lower, edged with something almost like respect. "Few have the courage to defy me. Fewer still without fear. You are reckless, woman." "And yet I live," Lyria said, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "It seems courage has its rewards." The man's eyes narrowed, and for the first time Lyria saw a shadow of vulnerability behind the strength he radiated. There were whispers in the kingdom about the Alpha King, a ruler feared for his power over men and beasts alike, a man who carried a curse that had kept him isolated for years. She had heard the stories, but standing before him now, she sensed the weight of a loneliness no tale could capture. The pup squirmed in her arms, whining softly, and she looked down at it. "I cannot leave it," she said. "It is hurt, frightened, and it has no one else." The man's jaw tightened. "You will regret this," he said, though the warning lacked the finality she expected. Instead, there was a pause, a silent struggle in his eyes. "You cannot simply wander into my world. Yet you save what is mine. Why?" "Because life is precious," Lyria said, "even if it is yours." She dared to meet his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. The king, though she did not yet know him by name, took a step back, as though the simple truth of her words unsettled him. He was a man used to command, to fear, to obedience. Her defiance, her refusal to shrink before him, was something he had not encountered in many years. "You are unlike anyone I have met," he admitted, his voice quieter now, tinged with something like wonder. "And yet, I cannot allow you to keep it." Lyria hugged the pup closer. "Then I will return it to you when it is safe, but not before." A flicker of frustration crossed his face, but it was swiftly masked by his stern composure. He studied her, searching for weakness, yet found none. For a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath, the storm above pausing in recognition of the tension between them. The king extended a hand, not to take the pup, but to steady himself. "You are brave," he said, almost reluctantly. "Perhaps too brave for your own good. The river is merciless. Do you know that few who enter it survive its currents?" "I know," Lyria said. "And I also know that some lives are worth risking for. This one is." The king's eyes lingered on the pup, then on her. The pup yipped softly, nudging against her chest, and he felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Admiration, maybe even something deeper he could not yet name. He had spent years ruling, feared and isolated, carrying the weight of a curse that left him wary of all who came near. Yet this woman, this stranger, had entered his world without fear and emerged holding what mattered most to him. "You have changed nothing and yet everything," he said finally. "Perhaps you are meant to be more than a wanderer in my lands." Lyria's heart skipped, though she forced herself to remain calm. "I have no desire to be more than who I am," she said, though even she felt the pull between them, an invisible thread tugging at her chest. The king looked down at the pup, who now rested quietly in her arms, and felt a strange protectiveness stir within him. He wanted to take it from her, to return it to its safe place, yet he could not find the courage to speak the command that would shatter the fragile bond she had formed. "You saved it," he said finally, almost to himself. "That die cannot be undone." "And I will not undo it," Lyria said. "It trusts me now, and it needs me." The king's gaze hardened, but only slightly. He was not used to negotiating with those who defied him, yet she had done so effortlessly. It unsettled him in ways he did not understand. He had always been the master of fear, the alpha king whose word was law, and yet here he stood, unsure, drawn into the warmth of her bravery and the pup's innocent trust. A sudden gust of wind rattled the trees, and the river surged again, as if warning them both. The king's eyes flicked toward the churning waters and then back at her. "You should go," he said, though there was a softness in his tone that betrayed his struggle. "The forest is not safe for someone like you." "I cannot leave it to die," Lyria said firmly, pressing the pup closer. "Not even if it belongs to a king." For a long moment silence stretched between them. The forest seemed to watch, the storm above mirroring the tension below. Finally, the king's voice broke the stillness, low and commanding, yet touched with a strange curiosity. "You cannot go." "Not yet." Lyria's heart skipped. She had faced death in the river, but now she faced a different kind of peril, one she did not fully understand. The Alpha King, ruler of a kingdom steeped in power and darkness, was holding her in place with nothing more than his gaze, and in that gaze she saw not only authority, but a longing she could not name, a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of steel and legend. The pup yipped softly, nudging her chin with its tiny nose, and she laughed quietly, a sound both fearless and tender. The king's eyes softened imperceptibly, and for a moment, the storm seemed to pause in recognition of what had passed between them, something fragile, dangerous, and profound. "You saved what is mine," he said again, more to himself than to her. "And yet, I do not hate you for it." Lyria met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Then let me stay long enough to keep it safe," she said. "After that I will leave. I promise." The king's lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of frustration and fascination. He wanted to command her, to assert his dominance as ruler, yet he could not bring himself to demand it. The river had claimed many, yet she had entered its chaos and emerged unbroken. And now she held what he loved most, and he could not simply turn away. "You are reckless," he said finally, voice low and measured. "But perhaps it is reckless that I cannot punish." Lyria smiled faintly, feeling the invisible tension coil between them like the wind through the trees. "Sometimes courage looks like recklessness," she said softly. The king's dark eyes studied her, searching for any sign of weakness. He found none, and yet something else stirred within him, a spark he had not felt in years, a pull toward a life he had long thought impossible. "You cannot leave," he said again, stepping closer, the storm above echoing the conflict in his heart. "Not yet." And for the first time, Lyria understood that this was more than a king's command. It was a man's desire wrapped in fear and mystery, and it would not be denied. The Alpha King led Lyria through the dense forest, his long cloak brushing against the undergrowth. The pup nestled safely in her arms. Every step they took seemed to echo through the trees, as if the forest itself were watching. The river's roar faded behind them, replaced by the quiet whispers of leaves and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Lyria kept her eyes on the path ahead, but she could feel the king's gaze on her. It was heavy, intense, and full of questions he dared not voice. He was a man used to command, used to fear, used to obedience, and yet with her he found himself at a loss. "You must understand," he said, finally breaking the silence, his voice low and steady. "The pup you saved is not just an animal. It carries my bloodline, the strength of my pack. Its life is tied to mine in ways you cannot imagine." Lyria tightened her hold on the pup, sensing the weight of his words. Then I am honored to have saved something so precious, she replied. But I did it because it needed help, not because of who it belongs to. The king's eyes darkened, a mixture of frustration and admiration flashing across his face. Few act without thought of reward. Even fewer risk themselves for another. He paused as though fighting an internal struggle. You are reckless, yet there is strength in your defiance. It unsettles me. Lyria glanced at him, curiosity and caution mingling in her gaze. Unsettled is not always a bad thing, she said softly. Sometimes it leads to understanding. He did not respond immediately, instead leading her deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, the shadows longer, and the sense of isolation more profound. Lyria felt it too. The forest seemed to hum with magic, a quiet energy that wrapped around them like a cloak. Finally, they reached the gates of the Alpha King's fortress. Massive stone walls rose into the sky, crowned with towers that glimmered faintly in the stormy light. The gates opened with a slow groaning sound, revealing courtyards and corridors steeped in history, filled with statues of past rulers and walls etched with symbols of power. Lyria stepped inside, her eyes wide at the grandeur and the coldness that lingered in every shadowed corner. It's beautiful, she whispered, though the chill in the air made her shiver. The king's gaze softened slightly as he watched her, but his tone remained firm. This place is my home and my responsibility. You must follow the rules here, for your safety as much as mine. I will, Lyria said, bowing her head slightly. I do not wish to cause trouble. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. You have proven yourself brave. Perhaps that is why I cannot simply send you away. Inside the fortress, life continued quietly around them. Servants moved with silent precision. Guards patrolled the corridors, and the echoes of footsteps followed them wherever they went. Lyria noticed the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that surrounded the king. She realized that his power was absolute, yet it came with chains of its own. He ruled not just with strength, but with a weight that isolated him from everyone around him. You are not like the others, he said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. Most would have fled or begged for mercy. You faced the river, faced death without hesitation. I could not stand by and do nothing, Lyria replied. Even if it is your pup. The king's dark eyes softened, but only for a moment. You do not know the dangers that follow this pup, he said. There are forces that would see it and me destroyed. Lyria's brow furrowed. Then we face them together, she said firmly. I will help you protect it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke, his voice quieter, almost a whisper. Few have ever offered me trust. Fewer still have earned it. I do not know if I can allow you to stay, yet I cannot bear to see you leave either. Lyria felt a strange warmth in her chest, though she did not allow herself to show it. She understood that he carried burdens she could not fully see, yet she felt drawn to him, compelled by something deeper than fear or duty. Days passed, and Lyria settled into the fortress under the king's watchful eye. She cared for the pup, nursed minor injuries, and learned the rhythms of life within the cold stone walls. The king observed her constantly, testing her courage and patience, placing her in situations that required both skill and bravery. Once, he led her to a courtyard where a training ground lay. A group of warriors sparred, their movements precise and deadly. Watch, he commanded, and Lyria did. She saw not only their skill but their loyalty to him, the way they followed his command without question. Yet she also saw the weight of his isolation in the way they hesitated around him, a silent fear that no one dared voice. You see them, he said, and yet they do not see me fully. They see a king, a ruler, a master, but they do not see the man beneath the power. I see him, Lyria said softly, surprising even herself with the honesty. I see the man who saved a pup from the river. The king's eyes flickered, caught off guard. Few have ever spoken to me like that, he said, his voice low, carrying a hint of something fragile. Most only speak to the crown, never to the man. Lyria met his gaze steadily. Because most are afraid. I am not. He studied her for a long moment, the tension between them thick and unspoken. Your courage? It unsettles me, he admitted, and yet it draws me closer. Their days were filled with quiet moments of observation, learning, and small acts of trust. Lyria discovered hidden chambers, ancient texts, and symbols of magic and power woven into the walls of the fortress. She learned of the king's curse whispered in the shadows of the castle, a bond that could never be broken, a burden of loneliness and fear and a destiny that weighed on his soul. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone halls, the pup whimpered and bolted from Lyria's arms. She chased it through the corridors only to find it missing when she reached the outer courtyard. Panic surged through her. The king appeared suddenly, his cloak swirling around him. "Where is it?" he demanded, his voice sharp with worry. "It's gone," Lyria said, breathless. "I don't know where it went." He clenched his fists, dark eyes blazing. "If it is lost, everything is lost. The bond, the curse, even my own heart." His voice faltered, revealing a vulnerability he rarely showed. "I'll find it," Lyria said firmly, stepping closer. "We'll find it together." The king's gaze softened, though the storm in his eyes remained. "You risk much for this." "For me," he said quietly. "Few would dare. Few would care." "I care," she said simply. "About it, about you. About what is right." For the first time in many years, the king felt the pull of something he had long denied: trust, connection, and perhaps even hope. Yet danger loomed, as dark forces stirred beyond the walls of the fortress, drawn by the bond between man and pup, by the courage of the woman who had dared to save what he loved most. The night grew darker, the wind howling through the fortress, carrying whispers of threats unseen. The king stood beside Lyria, his presence both protective and uncertain as the forest outside seemed to tense in anticipation of what was to come. "You must be ready," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Whatever comes, we face it together. But know this. This path is not safe, not for you, not for anyone who stands with me." Lyria met his gaze, her eyes steady and unwavering. "I do not fear danger," she said softly. "I fear only losing what I have saved, and perhaps losing you." The king's dark eyes softened, a storm of emotion swirling behind them. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder, a touch both possessive and protective, yet gentle enough to let her know she was free, for now. A sudden howl echoed through the fortress walls, and the pup yipped nervously, sensing the disturbance. The king's expression hardened, his instincts sharpening. "They are coming," he said, his voice low, a warning carried on the wind. Lyria's heart pounded, yet she felt no fear. She had faced the river and survived. She could face this too. And beside her stood a man whose power was absolute, whose curse weighed on him, yet whose heart was slowly opening to her presence. The storm outside raged louder, lightning flashing across the sky, and the fortress seemed to shudder under the power of forces gathering beyond their walls. The king's hand remained on her shoulder, firm and grounding as he spoke, voice low and dangerous. "You cannot leave," he said again. "Not now. Not while the darkness hunts what you have saved, and not while I am not ready to lose you." Lyria met his gaze, the pup trembling in her arms, and understood the gravity of his words. She had entered a world of power, danger, and curses. Yet she had also entered a world of connection, trust, and a bond she could not ignore, and so, as shadows deepened around the fortress and the wind carried whispers of threats unseen, Lyria and the Alpha King prepared to face the coming night together, two hearts bound by courage, defiance, and an unspoken longing that neither fully understood. The wind screamed through the fortress walls, carrying the scent of the forest and a warning that danger had arrived. Lyria tightened her grip on the pup, feeling its tiny heart thrum against her chest. The Alpha King's dark eyes scanned the horizon, every muscle in his body taut, prepared for the threat approaching. Shadows moved beyond the walls, silent and deliberate, as though the darkness itself had taken shape and was coming for them. "This way," the king said, his voice low and commanding, leading her through a hidden corridor known only to those closest to him. Torches flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the stone walls. Lyria followed without hesitation, trusting him completely, even as her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. The pup yipped nervously, pressing closer to her chest. She whispered soothing words, calming it. But her own nerves tingled with the energy of the approaching danger. This was not just any threat. It was tied to the curse that had shadowed the king's life for years, a darkness that sought to claim everything he held dear. They reached a chamber deep within the fortress, a place of ancient power and hidden magic. Symbols were etched into the walls, faintly glowing in the torchlight. The king placed the pup gently on a stone pedestal at the center, where protective enchantments radiated outward, forming a barrier against the unseen enemy. "You must stay here," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "It will be safe." You, however, must face what comes. I cannot allow this threat to reach you or the pup, but I also cannot ignore it." Lyria met his gaze, determination in her eyes. "Then we face it together," she said. The king's expression softened, revealing the vulnerability he rarely showed. "You do not understand the danger. It is not just force you face, it is a test of heart, courage, and trust." "I am ready," she said simply. "I have not faltered yet." The king studied her, searching for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he nodded. "Very well." Outside the fortress, the shadows moved closer. Twisted forms born of dark magic and anger circled the walls, eyes glinting with malice. The king stepped forward, drawing a blade that seemed to shimmer with energy, the steel humming in response to his presence. Lyria watched, knowing that every strike he made was not just a battle against enemies but a fight to protect everything he held dear, including her. The first shadow lunged, and the king met it with a roar, steel clashing against darkness. Sparks flew as the force of his power radiated outward, shaking the stones beneath their feet. Lyria's heart pounded as she witnessed the ferocity of a ruler who bore not only strength, but the weight of a curse he had carried for years. "You must trust me," he said, over the clash of steel and shadow. "I do," Lyria replied, her voice steady even as the fortress trembled. The battle raged, each moment a test of courage and endurance. Lyria could feel the pulse of the fortress, the magic woven into its walls, and the bond between the king and the pup. Every strike he made, every shadow he felled, seemed to echo the bond forming between them, strength drawn from trust, protection given without hesitation, and a longing that neither dared voice aloud. Amid the chaos, the king's gaze found hers, and for a brief second, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The shadows surged again, but the connection between them was a shield no darkness could penetrate. Lyria's heart swelled with a courage born of love and trust, and the pup yipped, sensing the strength radiating from both of them. Then, a shadow broke through the defenses, rushing toward the pedestal where the pup stood. Lyria's heart leapt in terror. "No," she cried, stepping forward, but the king's hand grasped hers, holding her back. "Trust me," he said, his voice fierce yet calm. In a blur of motion, he met the shadow, steel flashing, and the dark form recoiled, then vanished into the night. The force of his power sent a shockwave through the chamber, shaking the stones and rattling the torches. Lyria's breath caught in her throat as she watched him stand, blade still raised, eyes blazing with intensity. He had faced the darkness not for glory, not for fear, but to protect what he loved: the pup, the fortress, and her. When the last shadow dissipated, silence fell over the fortress, heavy and profound. The storm outside began to ease, the wind dying down, leaving only the faint murmur of the river in the distance. The king lowered his blade and approached the pedestal, lifting the pup into his arms. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice soft, almost tender. The pup nestled against him, and for a moment the weight of the curse seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile peace. Lyria stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "You did it," she said quietly. "You saved it. And us." The king looked down at her, eyes dark and stormy yet softened by something she could not name. "We did it," he corrected, a rare smile touching his lips. "You were as brave as any warrior, as steadfast as any companion. Without you, this would not have been possible." Her heart swelled at his words, and she realized that the bond between them had deepened far beyond the confines of duty or courage. It was trust, respect, and something far more profound, a connection that neither time nor curse could break. For the first time, the king allowed himself to be vulnerable, to show the man beneath the crown and power. He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with unspoken emotion. "You have changed me," he said, voice low and intense. "I was bound by fear, by curse, by solitude. And yet here you stand, and I feel something I have not felt in years." Lyria met his gaze, her own heart racing. "I never sought to change you," she said softly. "I only sought to save what was in danger, yet you have allowed me to stay, and I am grateful, more than I can say." He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a touch both gentle and commanding, a promise of protection and trust. "You cannot leave," he said quietly. Yet the words carried a depth that went beyond command. It was a choice, a desire, and a declaration all at once. "I do not wish to," she replied, a small smile lighting her face. "Not when we have fought together. Not when the bond is as strong as it is." The pup yipped softly, nuzzling her hand, as if understanding that its life, and the lives of those who cared for it, had been forever changed. The king's eyes softened as he watched the interaction, a rare warmth shining through the shadows of his past. Outside, the forest seemed to sigh in relief, the storm finally breaking, leaving a calm that felt like a promise of renewal. The king and Lyria stood together, the pup between them a symbol of courage, trust, and the unbreakable bonds that had formed in the face of darkness. "You have proven yourself," he said finally, voice steady yet imbued with emotion, not just in courage but in heart. "You have saved what I hold most dear, and in doing so you have saved me as well." Lyria felt tears prick her eyes, though she fought to keep them at bay. "Then we are even," she said softly. "You saved the pup and I saved something in you too." The king smiled, rare and genuine, a light breaking through the shadow of his usual sternness. "Perhaps," he said, "but this is only the beginning. We have faced the darkness tonight, but the world beyond these walls still waits, and I would face it again, with you by my side." Lyria nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The journey ahead would not be easy, but together, they had proven that courage, trust, and the strength of the heart could overcome even the deepest shadows. As the night settled over the fortress, and the first light of dawn touched the towers, the king lowered himself to kneel before her, not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as a man offering his trust, his heart, and his choice. "You cannot leave," he said once more. But now the words were a promise rather than a command. "Not ever. You have become mine as I have become yours." Lyria stepped closer, placing her hand over his, and the pup yipped happily between them, a small symbol of the bond that had formed through courage, defiance, and unwavering trust. And in that quiet moment, with the fortress bathed in dawn's first light, the Alpha King and Lyria knew that their lives had been forever changed, not by power, not by fear, but by the courage to face danger, the strength to trust, and the love that had quietly grown between them. The curse that had bound him for years no longer seemed so heavy. Not because it was gone, but because he had found someone who could stand beside him, who could face the darkness with him, and who had shown him that even in a world of shadows, the heart could find light.